In this project, I will be building these decorative pine shelves. They feature hand-cut simulated live edges and integrated remote-controlled RGB LED lighting. The wood used is standard framing lumber. It was chosen because it's inexpensive and offers the natural look that I wanted. Construction lumber is sold with these rounded corners, so that's good for making walls, but not for making shelves. So first, the edges are squared up. I don't have a joiner, so this process is done on the router table using a 13mm straight bit and a 1.6mm offset shim. Two passes on each side does the job. That's what we're looking for. I wasn't initially planning to video this build, so I didn't get video of assembling the shelf panels. Each is composed of 5 of the milled boards edge glued into a panel. I didn't use any dowels, biscuits, or anything else to align them, and while it came out pretty good, I probably will use something to aid alignment in the future. After the glue on each panel was fully dried, the panels had to be flattened. The tops of each board were close, but not aligned perfectly. I did what I could with a hand plane, but because there are many knots, it could only do so much. A lot of the flattening was done with the belt sander. Once flattened, the next process is to epoxy all of the imperfections in the surface. Clear epoxy will keep the appearance of the knots and other natural imperfections that I want to have in the final product while making it possible still to have a smooth surface. The epoxy product I'm using is designed for epoxy top tables such as wine cork tables. First, the sanding dust is removed. Then, a quantity of epoxy is mixed up according to the manufacturer's instructions. This product mixes 1:1, and it's important to stir it thoroughly. This is 30-minute epoxy. Anything with a quicker set time than that will run the risk of it gelling up before all of it gets used. Once the epoxy is thoroughly mixed, it is poured into each crack, knot hole, or any other feature of the wood that you would like to preserve. This epoxy will harden clear so that these features are not being covered up but are being preserved for the wood's natural beauty. Even if they are not obvious, just about every knot will have some kind of occlusion or recess that should be filled. This epoxy still has a lot of bubbles in it from stirring, and this will be taken care of shortly. Bubbles in the epoxy can be removed easily with a propane torch or with a heat gun. I like to use the heat gun for this process as I can heat the epoxy more slowly. This way, it's easy to tell when it has had enough heat when the epoxy becomes fluid, almost like water, and the air blast forms ripples onto the surface. It's important to remove the heat at this point as the epoxy will scorch quickly. Heat not only works the air bubbles out, but it will also help the epoxy flow into the recesses in the surface of the wood. This shows just the right amount of heat. Then it's left to cure for a good 24 hours. As it dries, the epoxy will settle into some recesses which will require additional filling. I like to find and mark each of these areas that will need additional epoxy so that none of them are missed. Then the epoxy process is repeated to refill any of the areas where yesterday's fill has settled. Epoxy is tough stuff. I go straight to the belt sander to remove any excess and smooth the surface. Then the whole process is repeated on the other side. Being shelves, both the top and bottom will be visible. It took several days to finish all of the epoxy. Now attention is turned to creating the simulated live edge. This will be cut with a jigsaw, but first a line must be marked for where the edge will go. I wouldn't attempt to freehand a course for the live edge. It would likely turn out to be more of a squiggle that wouldn't look very natural at all. What could be more natural looking than nature itself? To make my full live edges, I follow the grain lines that already exist in the wood. Routing the edge around and incorporating the knots in the wood adds to the intrigue. The edge won't be cut at a 90-degree angle. The shallower the blade angle on the jigsaw, the wider the minimum cut radius is. This must be kept in mind when drawing that edge. If the line makes sharper turns, the saw will have to cut at a steeper angle in order to make the curve. Now the edge is created. To make the cut look its best, a long wood cutting blade is used and set to a random angle. Slowly and following the drawn line, the edge is cut from end to end. The edge is looking good, but it needs variation. So after the big cut is done, the jigsaw blade is realigned and additional smaller cuts are added here and there, some steeper and some shallower. The jigsaw does a good job, but it cuts curves only in one dimension. Along the blade, the cut is still perfectly straight. More work still needs to be done to make the edge look natural. A rotary rasp works well to remove a lot of material quickly. Use the rasp sparingly though. It's a great tool for shaping the edge, but it leaves deep gouges in the surface which will require a lot of sanding later. For some projects, that look might add to the appearance of the edge, but for this, I want it to be smooth to the touch. Next, I moved on to the power sanders. I'm still doing significant shaping here, so the sander is using coarse paper. The shape of the edge is sculpted using a random orbit and an oscillating sander. And finally, the edge is hand sanded to finalize the shape. The final length of the shelves is to be 215 centimeters. Up until now, they've been kept intentionally at their original length. Now, a tape measure set to 215 centimeters can be test positioned anywhere on the shelf. This is so the exact location of the length cuts can be determined after the live edge has been created to see where it looks the best. Once located, a perpendicular line is referenced off of the back edge of the shelf, which is perfectly straight. The end is trimmed to size using a circular saw. After the first side is trimmed, the second can be measured. The length is referenced off of the post-cut edge to make sure that the final dimension is accurate. The planned length of the shelves only leaves about a 5 centimeter margin in my available space. And now the second end is trimmed. I'm off by a millimeter. On that note, I'll end part 1 here. Please check out the next video to see more of this project. Still to come are adding the LEDs to the shelves, applying a finish, and wiring it all up. Thanks for watching!